Thursday, the 25th day of January 2024. Hello and welcome to the News International Edition. We're coming to you live from our Vision Group headquarters here in Kampala, Uganda. I'm Emma Akwero. We start our news today from Zimbabwe, where prominent former opposition parliamentarian Job Sikala, who has already been in jail for 1.5 years, was convicted on Wednesday for inciting public violence. Another opposition member of parliament, Godfrey Sitholo, was also found guilty after a year-long trial. Sentencing will take place later after a mitigation hearing on Monday next week.
Authorities accused former MP Job Sikala and MP Godfrey Sithole of inciting supporters to avenge the death of their political ally, Mo Blessing Ali, who was murdered by a ruling party activist in May 2022. Harare-based magistrate Tafazwa Miti said the state proved its case beyond reasonable doubt as she delivered her judgment before a packed courtroom. Scores of anti-riot police were deployed at Harare Magistrates Court, blocking friends of the accused. The magistrate ruled that the pair incited public violence by ferrying mourners to Ali's memorial service, which was marred by violence. Miti also said the state proved that Sikala had said the area should be turned into a terror zone, which was captured in a video published on social media. Ali was abducted from the Nyatsime area by an activist of the ruling ZANU-PF party. Her decomposing body was found 21 days after she went missing. A memorial service for Ali was held days later, and political violence erupted, leaving a trail of destruction in the area. Sikala and Sithole were blamed, with prosecutors alleging that two connived to cause unrest. Following his arrest, Ali's family refused to bury her remains, which are believed to be in a government mortuary. Sikala has been in jail since June 14th after he failed to secure bail. Sithole is free. Some opposition supporters collapsed in despair when the verdict was reached, but Sikala himself remained upbeat and urged his relatives not to worry. His lawyer, Harrison Nkomo, said he intended to appeal.
Now in Tanzania, thousands have protested the changes made to the electoral laws in the largest public demonstration since the government lifted the ban on opposition political rallies about a year ago. Tanzania's main opposition party, Chadema, organized the rally in the main city of Dar es Salaam as lawmakers prepare to debate next month a raft of contentious electoral reforms proposed by the government.
Chadema leader Freeman Mbowe said the protests would spread from Tanzania's economic capital to other parts of the country until the government responds to its concerns. Tanzania is scheduled to hold its first presidential election in 2025 since the death of John Magufuli in late 2021 led to his deputy Samia Suluhu Hassan becoming leader of the East African country. Mbowe said the proposals did not address concerns over the last election in 2020, which Magufuli won in a landslide despite opposition claims of fraud. Chadema has been campaigning for constitutional reforms and a greater independence for the Electoral Commission to be included in the legislation to be debated by lawmakers in February. Mbowe called the proposals cosmetic, and particular opposition has been directed at a measure that would allow Hassan to directly appoint 5 of the 10 members of the Electoral Commission. The ban on opposition gatherings was overturned in January 2023. Shortly afterwards, one of Tanzania's most prominent opposition leaders, Tundu Lissu, returned to the country after having spent most of the previous 5 years in exile.
Now with shovels and hoes, some villagers were seen digging a house which stood in Rwanda to reveal a mass grave filled with bones. Victims of the genocide are still being found 30 years on.
Around 100 volunteers, many wearing face masks and rubber gloves, stand over the red soil in Ngoma village with a somber determination as the crowd watches on from the slope above. Skulls, teeth, and other shards of bone are placed carefully into plastic bags, while shoes and tattered clothing Possibly clues to identify loved ones never found are collected elsewhere. The remains of 119 people had been unearthed over 3 days. Naftali Ahishakiye, president of the genocide survivors group Ibuka, says there is no telling how many more might be found. Every time they dig deeper, they find more layers of soil with remains. The discovery of mass graves are remarkably frequent even 3 decades after the 1994 slaughter instigated by the Hutu extremist regime in Rwanda. At the time, the United Nations estimates around 800,000 people, mostly from the Tutsi minority, were killed over 100 days in an ethnic pogrom that turned neighbor on neighbor in the tiny East African nation. In Ngoma, about 3 hours' drive from the capital Kigali, roadblocks were erected and Tutsi dragged from their cars and murdered, said Goreth Owonkunda, a 52-year-old who has lived her entire life in the village. The history here is terrible. This is clearly one of the mass graves where they were dumped. The killers buried victims on top of others. We found big bones, some intact, even whole skulls. I knew the people who lived in this house, and I'm quite shocked that they comfortably slept on top of bodies every night and were all right with it. It is shameful and shocking. The mass grave was discovered beneath a family home. 5 of the family members have been arrested on suspicion of complicity in genocide and concealment of evidence. The investigation began last October when a whistleblower tipped off the authorities about the likelihood of a mass grave on the unremarkable rural property on a hillside off a main road. The appalling discovery has horrified those living near the graves all these years. But such graves are still being found across the country with grim regularity, underscoring the sheer scale of the slaughter between April and July 1994. Last April, in the western district of Rusizi, 1,100 bodies were discovered in mass graves located on a plantation belonging to a Catholic parish. 3 years earlier, in April 2020, a pit believed to contain as many as 30,000 bodies was exhumed near a dam in the east of the country. 6 months later, 5,000 bodies were discovered in Gatsibo district. Ibuka says the remains of more than 100,000 genocide victims have been unearthed across Rwanda in the past 5 years alone. It is suspected that those who lived in that house knew what was underneath them, and it was a family secret. We suspect that similar mass graves remain undiscovered across the country because there are survivors looking for their loved ones 30 years after the genocide. The biggest challenge is that vital information about the location of these mass graves is held by people who took part in the killings or relatives of the killers and are adamant against revealing such information. One still searching for answers is Celestine Kambanda, a 70-year-old farmer who has found none of the 7 children he lost in the genocide. In Ngoma, he keeps quiet vigil and waits for any sign among the scraps of cloth and bone being prized from the mud.
How sad it is even after 30 years. Now, Cameroon has launched the first ever malaria vaccination program to be offered nationwide in a step the WHO says or describes as this historic. The mosquito-borne disease malaria kills more than 600,000 people a year, with 95% of them in Africa. Children under 5 years old account for more than 80% of the deaths in Africa.
Following a pilot phase, the malaria vaccine is being rolled out at scale across Africa, starting in Cameroon. At a hospital in the town of Soa, 20 kilometers from the capital Yaoundé, 6-month-old Noanga became the first to receive the injection at the facility. Cheered and encouraged by the nurses, the infant received the jab, much to the relief of his mother, who was waiting to have his twin sister vaccinated too. Some parents are still hesitant about bringing their children to receive the vaccine, but I know that vaccines are good for children. It is one of many vaccine centers in 42 districts designated a priority across the vast Central African nation of some 28 million people. The jab will be offered free of charge according to the government and systematically to all children under 6 months old at the same time as other obligatory or recommended vaccinations. More than 300,000 doses of the vaccine arrived in Yaoundé in late November. Since 2019, more than 2 million children have been jabbed in Ghana, Kenya and Malawi in a pilot phase. The drive resulted in substantial reductions in severe malaria illness and hospitalizations. Burkina Faso, Liberia, Niger and Sierra Leone are set to follow with large-scale vaccination programs.
Now, Israel's ground offensive in the Palestinian territory, which came in response to the unprecedented attacks by Hamas militants on the October 7th attack against southern Israel, has shifted military attitudes towards women. There has been outrage, for example, that military leaders ignored warnings from young women assigned as lookouts along Gaza's militarized border. In the months leading up to the Hamas attacks, women are seen at the forefront battling alongside their male counterparts. We bring you more of this.
Mariam sprinted towards a post perched in the mountains above Israel's border with Egypt, slamming her Mi-6 rifle onto a defensive position as part of a training exercise. The 21-year-old soldier became one of the first Israeli women to fight in a combat role in Gaza, where she recently spent 2 weeks. Israel's ground offensive in the Palestinian territory, which came in response to unprecedented attacks by Hamas militants on the 7th of October against southern Israel, has shifted military attitudes towards women. In Gaza, it was the first time for all women. We can see the change. We can see the acceptance of the girls going into combat. At first, with the ponytail coming out from the helmet, the male soldiers look at it as a little strange, but at the end of the day, we are ready. We've trained for it. Since the early stages of the war, there has been outrage over media reports that military leaders ignored warnings from young women assigned as lookouts along Gaza's militarized border in the months leading up to the Hamas attacks.
That's something I always wanted to do. I always knew I wanted to be a combat, so of course I'm proud of myself and of every woman who does that. And to get there, like to be one of the first women who gets inside, feels really, it's a little bit weird because it's not something I thought I would do in my service, in the army, but it's always just pride, and I always want to give as much as I can. So.
But now, months into the Gaza war, women say they have found acceptance.
It feels very, I'm proud of my unit. I'm proud of all the women serving there. I'm proud of the men too. It's very hard work. It's a hard vibes there. It's all destroyed in there, and it could be hard, but we all the time thinking about the hostages and the friends that we lost during the combats there, and it's forgetting. You just forget everything that's going into you.
Hamas's attack on Israel resulted in the death of about 1,140 people, mostly civilians. Militants also seized about 250 hostages, around 132 of whom Israel says remain in Gaza. At least 27 captives are believed to have been killed. Vowing to destroy Hamas, Israel has been conducting a relentless air and ground offensive that has killed at least 24,927 Palestinians, around 70% of them women, children and adolescents, according to figures from the health ministry in Hamas-run Gaza. The Israeli army has reported 194 troop deaths since the beginning of ground operations in Gaza in late October. According to Israeli army, one woman soldier, Noah Masiano, who is 19 years of age, has died in Gaza. She had been taken hostage on the 7th of October, according to the army. Hamas said she was killed in an Israeli strike. Even before the State of Israel was created in 1948, women played an important role in the Haganah military that fought for the state's establishment. The majority of Israeli men are now required to serve 2 years and 8 months after they turn 18, while women serve 2 years. Women's roles had historically been confined to positions such as nurses or radio operators, but now they are allowed to serve in nearly every unit, including some combat units. Before the outbreak of fighting in Gaza, the rising number of women recruits were assuming combat roles. The number of women combat soldiers jumped 350% between 2013 and 2017, according to data compiled by the Israel Democracy Institute think tank. In 2022, women made up 17% of the fighting force, according to the Institute for National Security Studies, an Israeli think tank. Maron, who serves in the Bardelas battalion, said more of her friends and their sisters are asking her about serving in the army. You can see more women when they get to 18 want to serve in combat. When we win this war, and we will win this war, then we get to do the time for plans for life.
And finally, from the US, an 11-year-old boy is hearing for the first time in his life after receiving a breakthrough gene therapy. The Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which carried out the treatment, said in a statement that the milestone represents hope for patients around the world with hearing loss caused by genetic mutations.
Aysam Dam was born profoundly deaf because of a highly rare abnormality in a single gene. Surgeon John Jamila said gene therapy for hearing loss is something that physicians and scientists in the world of hearing loss have been working toward for over 20 years, and it is finally here. He said gene therapy studies may open the door for future use for some of the over 150 other genes that cause childhood hearing loss. In patients like Aysam, a defective gene prevents the production of otophalin, the protein necessary for the hair cells of the inner ear to be able to convert sound vibrations into chemical signals that are sent to the brain. Otophalin gene defects are highly rare, accounting for 1 to 8% of hearing loss present from birth. On October 4th, 2023, he underwent a surgical procedure that involved partly lifting his eardrum and then injecting a harmless virus which had been modified to transport working copies of the otophalin gene into the internal fluid of his cochlea. As a result, the hair cells began making the missing protein and functioning properly. Almost 4 months since receiving the treatment in one ear, Aysam's hearing has improved to the point he only has mild to moderate hearing loss, and he is literally hearing sound for the first time in his life. The New York Times reported that despite being able to hear, Aysam, who was born in Morocco and later moved to Spain, may never learn to speak, as the brain's window for acquiring speech closes around the age of 5.
And that's all the international news we had for you this afternoon. We'll be back again tomorrow at 4 p.m. Thank you for watching. Have a good afternoon.